This audio play contains strong language and descriptions of gore you may find disturbing. So let's take a look at what's coming up. A pair of eyes following your movements with some unknown purpose in mind.
All I want is to sleep. Please, someone just let me sleep.
Polly could hear the sound of bones splintering.
You will now experience negative
The
reinforcement.
bedsheets were stained rust brown with old blood.
Turn it off! Please turn it off!
Welcome to the Tales of the Fulcrum Knights. Written, narrated, and edited by Harry Bullman. Happy Halloween! We are all Fulcrum.
We are all Fulcrum.
The multiverse is chaos. A maelstrom of infinite probabilities that churns the waters of time and space with raging currents of causality. Within that tumult, possibilities appear on the surface, only to be dragged back within the vortex in an instant. Any understanding we may think to have of the universe is but a fleeting glimpse of what has been or what may be, in only one of a never-ending number of branching timelines. That is why we built our library here, in the eye of the storm. From our position at the nexus of the omniverse, the pivot point of all timelines, we gather and protect our stories. The Order of the Fulcrum Knights stands eternal to keep and share the tales of infinity that would otherwise be lost to oblivion. We are all Fulcrum.
We are all Fulcrum.
In many of the timelines that race around our library, a season has arrived when the barriers between the realms of mortals, fey spirits, and the dead become thin. This season has many names: Samhain, Halloween, the Day of the Dead. Today, as we read from the stories we have most recently recovered, the influence of this season can be seen clearly. We begin by reading the story from a universe where technology is somewhat advanced, but bureaucracy far more so. Submitted to the archives of the Fulcrum Knights, this story is titled Tech Support. Mayer screwed his eyes closed to block out the harsh airlock lights. Waking up from stasis, even from a relatively short journey of 8 weeks, always left him with a nasty hangover.
Computer!
Mayer commanded, shouting a little over the whining hiss from the airlock door.
Dim the lights to 4.
The computer responded with Sungway Industries' signature, and the lights dimmed. Mayer breathed a sigh of relief and massaged his forehead. The airlock door soon stopped hissing, all pressures now equalized. The door slid open, and Mayer stepped through, the kit bag in his right hand jangling as he walked. Upon entering the station reception, he immediately covered his eyes again. The lights in here were as bright as they had first been in the airlock.
Lights! 4!
Mayer shouted. Another, and the lights went down again. Mayer sighed and his shoulders sagged.
Computer,
he said. Lower lights in all public areas to 4. That should keep him from a nasty shock each time he opened a door. Now it was time to set to work. Maya called on the computer again. Lead me to ops. A door, only a few meters to his left, opened. A warm blue light began to pulse in a straight line across the floor, directing Maya through the door.
The blue guidance line will take you to operations.
The first time the computer had actually spoken to him. Maya had heard so many Sungway stations say the same thing in that same female voice with the calm Earth accent. He spoke the next line along with her. If the guidance line does not appear or you require non-visual directions, please ask for direction settings. Maya had been coming out to maintain these automated outposts for 3 years now, and he knew all of that voice's stock phrases by heart. Sometimes on long stasis journeys, that voice filled his dreams. Following the guidance line, Maya was led into a long, white corridor. Like all of the corridors on these stations, it was clean and functional. Although this one was a little unusual. Unlike most featureless rooms he was forced to work in, the whole wall to his right was a long observation window. As he walked, Maya looked out toward the dark expanse of space. He could just see the nose of his maintenance ship peeking out from behind the station's primary docking platform. Odd. Most of these unmanned stations were built without windows. Better not waste time and do a preliminary check. Computer, confirm current maintenance status, Maya called out. The computer responded in its usual Earth accent.
Sungway Testing Facility, designation WLGF-9613, is currently experiencing minor directory issues. An error report has been logged, and a qualified Sungway engineer will arrive soon.
Soon was a more than relative term. A lie, some would say. Maya had left 4 hours after the report was logged, and even for a nearby station like this, it had taken 2 months for him to arrive. The computer continued talking.
Your engineer's name is Henry Mayer, and will be able to provide the necessary assistance you require. In the meantime, you may experience some incorrect or reduced service from the subject feeding system.
Maya stopped walking. Subject feeding? He said aloud. The computer didn't respond. Maya frowned. It wasn't that unusual to have living things on these unmanned stations. Lab rats, hydroponic plants. But here... Maya looked at the observation window. Not through it, at it. He picked up his pace and followed the guidance line through a left-hand door and entered operations. Operations was a blank white cube of a room. After stepping in, the door closed behind Maya without leaving any trace of seam in the wall. Work surface, Maya said. With a quiet rasp, a long shelf extruded from the wall directly in front of Maya, about level with his navel. He walked up to the shelf and laid his kit bag onto it. Open maintenance screens, he told the empty room. Instantly, 8 hologram monitors blossomed open on the blank white walls. Maya quickly scanned his eyes over the performance meters and station manifests, and quickly found something he didn't want to see.
Ah, fuck! He cursed. I fucking knew it!
Under the station's manifest was a list of distinctly human names. Savid Gupta, Lacey Nguyen, Chuetel Unkoba, and a lot more. All he had left was the hope that someone liked to give their lab rats really boring names.
Computer, he asked, are there any people aboard this station besides me?
Yes. Sungway Testing Facility designation WLGF-9613 is currently in use by Landers and Trivedi PLC to perform voluntary human testing of...
Maya stopped listening and tugged at his hair.
No, he
He groaned. I really didn't want this today. He let go the grip on his hair, sighed, and reluctantly asked, Computer, do the human passengers aboard require a welfare check? It was Sungway's protocol that if human passengers were aboard a station during any maintenance visit, engineers were required to carry out welfare checks if deemed necessary by the automated system. Mayer was good at his job, but checking on people living in isolation for what can be years at a time was not something he was professionally or emotionally qualified for. The computer had been cut short from its speech and took a moment to answer his new question.
A welfare check is required for the passengers of Sungway Testing Facility Designation WLGF-9613. Reports of injuries and medical emergencies among passengers have increased by 600%.
600%? Mayer echoed. He felt the bottom fall out of his stomach. Reduced service of the subject feeding system? Increased medical emergencies? All those weeks he'd been sleeping on the journey here, those poor bastards must have been starving to death. It'd be a miracle if they were still alive. Mayer scrambled for his kit bag, spilling dozens of steel instruments out of the bag and onto the floor. He managed to find the emergency transponder and smashed the transmit button so hard he almost broke the touchscreen.
Welcome to the Sungway Emergency Transmission System.
The transponder spoke in the same calm voice as the station computer.
Please record your message at the tone.
This is Sungway engineer Henry Mayer, he gasped. Immediate medical emergency team is needed at testing station WLG. Fuck! Mayer was shaking. He felt like he could barely speak, let alone remember the damn designation number. Computer! He cried. Confirm station designation!
This is Sungway Testing Facility Designation WLGF-9613.
The computer happily recited. There! Mayer screamed at the transponder. That's where I am! Get here quick! God, please get here quick! The fucking food wasn't working! These people have been starving for 2... The transponder cut him off.
Thank you. Your recorded message is now being transmitted to all Sungway frequencies at high priority. Help will arrive soon. Please remember that all Sungway employees are legally required to provide emergency assistance to Sungway's clients to the best of their ability. Please be aware that transmitting this message does not fulfill this requirement.
Tears started stinging in Mayer's eyes. Oh God! He almost choked on the words. He didn't want to be part of this.
Please remember that all Sungway employees are...
The transponder was looping, its calm voice mocking Mayer's panic. Okay! Mayer shouted. Okay! Computer, lead me to the other people on board. The same blue guidance line sprouted on the floor, running from his feet to a door that was now appearing in the far left wall. And computer, please prepare medical protocols to treat multiple patients for malnutrition. Mayer wiped his nose on his wrist and tried to steel himself for what he was about to see. He took a step towards the door when the station computer spoke.
Malnutrition treatment protocols are not necessary.
What? Mayer turned and looked up at the hologram monitors on the wall. These people are starving. What do you mean?
No passengers on board are currently suffering from malnutrition.
Mayer shook his head. He didn't understand. You said medical emergencies had increased by 600%. What's hurting them?
The 2 highest causes of injuries have been identified as other passengers and necessary use of the negative reinforcement system.
Other passengers? Mayer muttered. Wait, negative reinforcement? What's the negative reinforcement system?
Test volunteers at Sungway Testing Facility Designation WLGF-9613 are contractually required to maintain their physical health. Behavior that impedes or harms their own health incurs automatic negative reinforcement.
Mayer stood frozen to the spot. He stared up at the hologram monitors, trying to understand. He looked at the names on the manifest.
Computer,
he asked, then swallowing hard.
show me Savid Gupta.
A new hologram monitor opened in front of him. On it, he saw a habitation room. It wasn't blank like here in Operations. There were bookshelves and framed pictures on the walls. He could even see a wash basin and the edge of a toilet. Most of the image was taken up by a bed. Mayer squinted, hoping he wasn't seeing what he thought he could see. The bedsheets were stained rust brown with old blood, a stain that Mayer now realized was on almost everything in the room. And on top of the bed, in a tattered Sungway-issued jumpsuit, was Savid, or at least most of him. Savid was curled, his knees pulled close to his chest. That made it easy to see that his feet were missing. Savid's legs ended in raw, skinless stumps. Mayer thought he could see white flashes of bone amongst the exposed red flesh. Mayer clamped a hand over his mouth as he let out a desperate, guttural moan. He almost screamed when he saw the wall next to Savid slide open, like the doors here in Operations. On the silent monitor, Savid and the entire bed he was on was pulled into the wall and out of the room. When Savid was finally out of sight, the wall closed behind him, and he was gone. Mayer looked around, desperate for answers. He needed to speak but could barely manage it.
Where?
He eventually managed.
Where is Savid? Computer!
The computer didn't answer. Instead, it changed the feed to the monitor. Mayer was now looking at another habitation room, just like Savid's. But there were two people in this room. One was Savid, no longer on a bed, but sprawled in a heap on the floor. There was no sound feeding to the monitor, but Mayer could see he was screaming. There was a woman in the room. She looked to be in the same awful state as Savid. Her clothes were also blood-stained, and she cradled one of her arms close to her chest. Her hand was severely injured. The woman was screaming back at Savid. She seemed hysterical, terrified of him.
Sound.
Mayer barely got the quivering word out of his mouth, but the computer understood. It added audio to the feed on the monitor, and a horrible sound filled Operations.
No! I don't need to! I'm telling you, I'm not hungry yet!
It was the voice of the woman howling. Savid wasn't talking, just making awful wailing sounds that made Mayer feel like he was suffocating. But over all that noise was the all-too-familiar voice of the computer.
Test volunteers at Sungway Testing Facility, designation W, LG F-9613, are contractually required to follow the meal plans set out for them. If you continue to refuse your meal, you will incur negative reinforcement.
No!
The woman kept screaming.
Don't make me! I can't! I don't need to eat yet!
The computer, uncaring, stated plainly,
You will now experience negative reinforcement. The reinforcement will conclude when you have met your contractual obligations.
In almost an instant, a steel probe sprung out from a wall nearest the woman and plunged into her spine. Her screaming reached a pitch that made the audio feed from the room crackle. Mayer felt hot urine soak the crotch of his uniform. The woman on the monitor scrambled to get away from the probe in her back. She pulled off it, leaving the end of the instrument slick with blood. She fell to her knees, sobbing, hunched over what was left of Savid's ankles.
I'm sorry.
She was saying.
I'm sorry.
Mayer threw up his arms over his eyes as she sank her teeth into Savid's bloody stumps. "Turn it off!" he shouted. "Please fucking turn it off!" The hologram monitor blinked out of existence, and Savid's gut-wrenching screams no longer filled the operations room. Meyer stood for what seemed like a very long time, his head still covered by his arms. Eventually, he uncovered his face and spoke in a croaking voice. "Computer," he said, "show me the directory for the subject feeding system." A new hologram monitor opened, and Meyer scanned the rows and rows of text. He saw what he thought he would. Somehow, sometime 2 months ago, maybe during a botched update or just an incomplete boot cycle, the directory for the feeding system had copied the passenger list into the meal plans. No one had starved while Meyer was on his way. The computer had just forced them to eat each other. "Computer," Meyer instructed, "perform a system restore, using a restore point from 10 weeks prior." All hologram monitors closed as the computer restored itself back to a version with no directory errors. The lights were raised back to full brightness, and Meyer squinted through the glare.
All persons aboard Sungway Testing Facility, designation WLG F-9613. Your Sungway engineer, Henry Mayer, has ordered a full system restore. You may experience reduced service for all systems momentarily. Henry Mayer has been instructed to conduct a welfare check on all passengers and will speak to you shortly.
"We are all Fulcrum."
We are all Fulcrum.
The question of humanity and how it is defined is not reserved for the creation of computer intelligences, but also how our own humanity is altered by the regulations and structures of bureaucracy we build around ourselves. However, in this next story, we may ponder another aspect of the human spirit, our ability to fear, and how the fears we conjure may control our minds. Submitted to the archives of the Fulcrum Knights, this story is titled A Face at the Window. I grew up in an isolated rural area on the coast of England. The road I lived on had a row of houses on one side and nothing but fields on the other. If you peered over the fence in my back garden, all you'd see were fields out that side too. It was a quiet place at night, when no one was up and no cars were driving past. All you could hear was the wind and the sea roaring about a mile away. There was no light on the road either. A family friend from London came to stay with us once, and I remember how surprised she was that when she turned out the lights, the room actually got dark. None of that yellow glow of streetlights outside that she was used to. In fact, it got so dark outside that if you were home at night with the lights on, you couldn't see anything through the windows. If you looked, all you'd spot was your own reflection looking back at you. Unless you turned out the lights. Flick the switch off, and the reflections would vanish. Dark shapes in the garden suddenly leapt out at you. Gnarled tree branches swaying in the wind. A bird table skulking in the shadows of a bush. A silhouette that all of a sudden moves and stops your heart before you realise it's the neighbour's cat on the prowl. I never really thought much of it when I was a boy. I remember a babysitter who once stood up from watching TV and told me and my brother she had a distinct feeling that she was being watched. I remember standing with my brother in the middle of the dining room while she turned off every light, plunging us into the dark so she could see outside, almost pushing her nose up against the glass to try and spot a voyeur lurking in the garden. And while the hairs did stand up on the back of my neck, and even though I expected her to shriek at any moment, to crash backwards into the Welsh dresser, scared out of her skin by a bloodied psychopath stood on the other side of the window pane, nothing actually happened. She saw nothing in the garden. And the lights were put back on, and so was the TV, and I soon forgot about the entire episode. It was only until I was a teenager and started staying up late that the windows worried me at night. When I stayed up past midnight in the living room watching horror movies and late-night comedies with the sound turned down, it'd be my job to turn out all the lights before heading to bed. I'd turn the TV off, and the silence that fell was smothering. With my mum asleep upstairs, that choking silence suddenly brought home how alone I was those nights. First I'd walk to the hall, through the dining room, the furthest away from the stairs. I think the hall was the first place the fear really got me. The light switch in there was just inside the door, so I didn't really have to go in properly, but directly facing where I stood was a large picture window. As always, as soon as the lights went out, everything outside snapped into focus. On those nights, I knew how my old babysitter had felt. The gnawing sensation in your stomach that somewhere, just out of sight, someone is watching you, studying you intently. A pair of eyes following your movements with some unknown purpose in mind. And each night that I readied myself to flick that switch, my heart would climb into my throat. Each night I was terrified that I'd finally see who was watching me. So far, the watcher was an unknown quantity, most likely imaginary. But I couldn't shake the certainty in my head that one night the lights would go out and it would finally be revealed. The face. Pale and arch, with sallow cheeks and round, unblinking eyes that show too much of their whites. The face that waited patiently outside just for me to arrive. That didn't flinch when I exposed it, or even as I screamed and fell backwards through the open door back towards the stairs. The face of some creature infinitely calm and dedicated to one goal that only it knows. And I would run, barefooted through the house, unable to scream again for fear of finally disturbing that placid face, unable to look around me for fear that more faces had appeared pressed against the glass of other windows, or stepped out from what I'd thought were empty shadows, only for me to stop, suddenly, on the stairs, the muscles in my arms and legs burning, begging for me to flee. But I can't bring myself to move further. Because I know that the window in my bedroom has been left open. And at that moment, another face is squeezing its dark, sinewy body into my home. And from all sides, 100 other faces probe and pick with long white fingers. In the door cracks, the window frames and the letterbox, searching for anything they can exploit to force their way into my house. And I stay there, paralyzed on the staircase, with no choice but to wait for them, to have goosebumps ripple down my spine at the feeling of hot breath on the back of my neck, and to finally learn why they watched me. Each night that I turned that light off, I thought of all of this. And when I finally did turn off the light, there was never anything there in the window except the flower pots outside. So I just carry on turning off lights, one by one, trying not to look at the windows. And when I was done, I'd get in bed and sleep. Eventually. We are all Fulcrum.
We are all Fulcrum.
It is said that bravery is the act of persevering, even though your fears tell you to give in. However, in our final tale for this gathering, perseverance may prove to be the folly, and fears may prove to be the truth. Submitted to the archives of the Fulcrum Knights, this tale is titled The Lake of Insanity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next speaker, Dr. Polly Vorta. Polite applause rippled in the audience. Polly stepped out from the dark recesses of the wings and into the light of the stage. As she walked toward the podium at centre stage, Professor Catherine Melrose, her announcer, patted her on the shoulder and mouthed, "Good luck," before leaving the way Polly had come. Standing under the hot spotlight, Polly took a moment before speaking. She smiled into the full auditorium and felt tall and confident. Polly was very proud of her talents at public speaking. It was a skill many of her peers lacked, almost all of whom were gathered before her. "I hope you all enjoyed your lunch," she said, "and that you got a chance to look around at the visitors' centre. I've been here before myself, and it really is a beautiful place to visit." She smiled again. Personal details like that made the audience more receptive to her. Polly knew all the tricks for winning an audience. "Some of you may know me from my CPD seminar at last year's conference. And for those of you who don't, you're in luck, because I'll be running it again tomorrow. Right now, however, I'll be a lot less technical and share with you an extraordinary anecdote. One that extends from Middlesex, here in England, to the Peruvian Andes and centres around this." Polly reached to the podium on her left and picked up a remote control. She clicked the remote, and the image of the conference logo projected onto the large backdrop behind her changed to the first slide of her presentation. The image elicited a smattering of oohs and ahs from the audience. It was hard for Polly to suppress a smug little chuckle. "This," she announced, "is Lago de Locura." Polly turned to look up at what the audience could see. Projected above her was the side of a grand mountain. The photo resembled a masterful oil painting, with brushstrokes of ochre rock face and highlights of green, lush grass. At the centre of the image, nestled within the rock, was a lake. The water was a bright, clear turquoise along the shore, and slowly darkened to an emerald green at its heart. "For those in the audience who don't speak Spanish," Polly explained, "that means the Lake of Insanity. I'm sure you'll agree with me that it's not a name that fits such a gorgeous place. The only thing that seems insane to me is how hard it is to reach. To take a paddle in Lago de Locura, you'd have to make your way about 4,000 feet up the side of the Tucuhuasi mountain in the Huancavelica region of Peru. That's a little too far for my liking. I'm more of a sunbathing on the beach with my Kindle sort of girl." A little laugh from the audience. Polly didn't mind that it wasn't bigger. The quieter the audience was, the more she had them hooked.
This lake may not be my preferred holiday destination, but it was a passion for one man, who some of you may recognize.
Polly clicked the remote again, and Lago di Locura was replaced by a young man's selfie from Instagram.
Does anyone recognize Lucas Jennings? I think I see some people nodding. Have you ever read his blog? It's really something wonderful, isn't it?
Lucas's picture smiled down on the auditorium. In the Instagram post, his face was both weathered and full of youth. His skin had a warm tan, and deep, happy crow's feet spread from the corners of his eyes. His hair was a light brown, bleached almost blonde by long exposure to the sun.
Lucas is best known as a travel blogger,
Polly explained.
His blog is focused most specifically on diving and wild swimming. Lucas has travelled the world to post his stories. He's explored coral reefs off the coast of Australia and swam underneath 10 inches of ice in Norway. But after seeing this lake,
Polly switched back to the picture of the mountain.
Lucas was smitten. Lago de la Cura became his Everest, his white whale. For 3 years, from 2012 to 2015, Lucas researched and planned and spoke to every travel agent he could, trying to find this lake and how he could get there. After searching for years, what Lucas ultimately found was a madcap journey of chartered planes, off-road driving, kayaking and mountain climbing, as well as a lot of warnings. You don't call it the Lake of Insanity for no reason. Every time Lucas encountered someone who knew about the lake, they'd do their best to dissuade him. Even some of his fans were trying to stop him. I've got a quick video here that Lucas has allowed me to use from his Instagram account.
Polly advanced the presentation again, and a video began to play. Lucas now appeared in motion on the backdrop. He was holding the camera up to his face with his left hand and packing a large duffel bag with his right.
Hey guys,
Lucas said, not looking at the camera.
I'm making a quick video for you all because I don't really have time to write a blog post tonight and I wanted to speak to everyone.
Lucas stopped packing and looked at the camera. The humour that had filled his eyes in his selfie was absent now.
Honestly, I'm not happy I'm having to make this video, but I guess I need to remind some of you what this blog is about and what our community is about.
He paused and looked away from the camera. After a moment, he returned to packing his duffel, aggressively throwing items inside.
Tonight,
he continued,
I'm getting ready because in about...
He looked at his watch.
7 hours, Josie and I are boarding the first of our 2 flights to reach Tama. Now, most of you know how important this trip is to me and how long I've been planning it. It's taken years to track down a route to the Lago de la Cura, and it's finally happening. I should be really excited about this evening.
Lucas looked back to the camera.
But in the last 2 hours, there's been, 40 comments?
Lucas seemed to be asking someone off camera. Polly could just hear a small voice on the video say,
43. 43 comments. That was Josie, by the way. 43 comments trying to stop me from going. Now really, what's that about? We're supposed to support each other here, not bring each other down. We're supposed to be #CanDo here, but where's all that gone tonight?
Lucas held his head in his hand for a moment. Then he suddenly lurched away from the bag he was packing, moving so fast the camera footage became an unrecognisable blur. When the image eventually cleared, Lucas was marching through a hall in his house, growling.
Oh, just show you!
Lucas stopped marching at a series of framed photos on a beige wall. Each one showed a different body of water in glossy photo print.
Here, look.
he said, drawing the camera in closer to the photos.
This one here, that's the Devil's Cauldron. That one there was the Widowmaker. This...
Lucas slapped his finger down on one of the frames.
This one here was called the Pit of Despair. The actual Pit of Despair. Some of these are rivers, right? And lakes and reservoirs that I've been in didn't even have plants in them because nothing can live in them. And I went to them and I swam in them all and none of you were trying to stop me then.
Lucas turned the camera back around on himself. Behind him, the nervous figure of Josie could be seen peering at him from the end of the hall.
We're supposed to be #CanDo.
Lucas told the camera, wagging his finger along with the words.
I don't have time for this hate that you're bringing. Let's see a bit less of that tonight, okay?
The video ended, leaving Lucas's frowning face frozen on the backdrop. His index finger, raised over his head, gave him the look of a stern schoolteacher. Polly let the auditorium remain in silence for a second or two before she spoke.
Not one to be put off easily, she said. You heard his little catchphrase in that video. #CanDo. It might be more appropriate to say #JollyWellWillDo. So, Lucas and Josie boarded their flight, landed at Francisco Cale Airport in Peru, and began the sometimes perilous but always exciting journey to the Lake of Insanity. If you happened to follow Lucas on Instagram at the time, you were really seeing the best the app had to offer.
Polly proceeded to flash a series of photos on the backdrop. Misty mountain ranges appeared, followed by long romantic stretches of dirt road. Sometimes the photos featured only a breathtaking landscape, other times beautiful, smiling Peruvians. And, on occasion, Lucas himself was in frame. His beaming face was a world away from the frustrated man in the video Polly had just shown.
And finally,
Polly made the audience wait for the last image.
mission accomplished.
Lucas appeared on the backdrop, breaking through the surface of brilliant green water. The photo had caught him mid-backstroke. One arm pointed toward the sky, trailing a great, shining arc of water behind it. His lips were parted, baring his teeth in an ecstatic grin.
Lucas stepped into the waters of Lago de la Cura and found nothing but cool, empty depths and a lot of gypsum stones. His local guides didn't join him in his little dip, and even Josie, a woman who had supported all of her husband's endeavours, stayed out of the water because she didn't want to take the chance that the stories her guides had been telling her on the way there were true. But when Lucas swam back to shore, he was happy and accomplished and was experiencing no negative side effects, other than a little shivering from the cold water. In fact,
she said frankly,
swimming in the Lake of Insanity was disappointingly uneventful. Disappointing for my story, I mean. It certainly wasn't for Lucas. The journey back home to the UK was also very straightforward by all accounts. Other than a week spent on the more traditional tourist pastimes in Peru, it was totally uneventful. So, as I work my way to my point, and I assure you, I do have a point, I think it's time I told you how Lago de la Cura got its ominous name.
Polly clicked the remote, moving her presentation onto a stunning image of ancient ruined buildings, shrouded by a thick forest.
Peru is one of the cradles of humanity. More than 5,000 years ago, the area was home to the Norte Chico, one of the oldest known civilizations in the world. Very little is known for certain about the Norte Chico. There's almost no records of their culture that survived long enough to be found by archaeologists. The things we do know come from the deep links between the Norte Chico and the Incan society that later developed in the same area. Of those few insights we have, our Lago de la Cura is a shining point of clarity. The Nortechico were very specific about it.
Polly switched the projection to a photo of an ancient sandstone carving. A woman's face, with a wide, straight nose and eyes as big as saucers, was engraved in the worn stone. She wore a large crown, shaped like the rising sun, and her earlobes were stretched by heavy earrings.
This beautiful woman is Mama Cocha. She's the mother of lakes and rivers, and she fills the world with water. To the ancient people of Peru, she was a loving bringer of life, and like all mothers, Mama Cocha gave life unconditionally. From the most radiant fish in the river to the ugliest worm in the mud. But the Nortechico told a story about a time when that unconditional love brought a monster into the world. Historians disagree if that monster had a father, or if the new child was born of an immaculate conception after Mama Cocha suffered a terrible loss. What they do agree on is that while this child was given all the same love as every other creature in the water, it could give no love itself. It came into the world with only the ability to take. Mama Cocha tried to be a good mother and gave her new child the same life as all her children. But this baby took too much from its siblings. It took and took until it even stole their minds. Anything that shared its water, even human beings, were driven mad. It was so bad they'd stop eating, and eventually they starved to death. So many lives were lost to this new baby. Mama Cocha had to do something. But it was still her baby. Even if it didn't love her or her family, she still loved it. So Mama Cocha gave the baby its own lake, high up on a mountain, where it was safe and the world was safe from it.
Polly pressed the remote. Lago de la Cura was projected yet again. Polly was a little uncertain with her words. She didn't know if this was a good idea.
Can I ask for a little audience participation? Please, put your hand up if you're worried about Lucas, after hearing that story.
Nothing happened. Polly's breath caught in her throat. That was a misstep. She'd gone too far. Then, a hand went up in the front row, and one in the third row, and suddenly hands were coming up all over like weeds. Polly nodded. Her breath returned.
It does colour your opinion a little, doesn't it? Even when we know it's just a story. Well, checking back in with Lucas, he was simply carrying on with his regular life. His star was continuing to rise online, and he was now looking for his next wild swimming adventure. What was a little different was Lucas had started adding a new subject to his regular content, something he called the noise. I think it's best that Lucas explains himself.
Polly played another video. Lucas was alone on camera, sitting in the driver's seat of his parked car.
Hey guys,
Lucas said, waving to the camera.
I'm just sitting in the car park, about to see a specialist about my hearing. Don't worry, I'm not going deaf, but my GP thinks I might have tinnitus. Or I think...
Lucas stopped himself from talking and took a deep breath in.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, started noticing this noise at night when I was sleeping. It was kind of like scratching or a scraping noise. Josie couldn't hear it, but it was there, and we assumed it was mice at first, or something in the walls at least. We had a couple of people out to look at the walls and couldn't find anything. Definitely nothing in the bedroom walls. I even had the bed frame checked for woodworm or termites or something, but there's none of that either. So, after the noise kept going for a few weeks, I realised that It's nothing to do with the house. I can hear it everywhere I go. If it's quiet, I started noticing that during our yoga sessions that the scratching kept going. So I'm pretty sure it's something to do with me. That's why I'm here.
Lucas picked up the camera and turned it around, showing the view through his car windscreen. Directly in front of the car, nestled between two bushes, was a blue NHS sign. The sign identified Lucas's location as St. Alphege Healthcare. Lucas continued talking off camera.
And basically just here to rule out tinnitus. I don't think it's that. I mean, this isn't even what tinnitus sounds like. It's like high-pitched, like ee noise. Not scratching.
Lucas turned the camera back to him.
No,
he said, wagging his finger.
No, I think this is the sound. Well, I looked it up, and there are millions of people who can hear the sound, right? Not everyone can, but it's always there. And you can't record it, you can just hear it.
Lucas was quiet for a moment, slowly nodding.
Yeah, there it is. I can hear it now. Little scratching noises. Scritch, scritch, scritch.
The video ended abruptly.
The sound,
Polly announced,
is a recognised phenomena, and very little is known about it. However, the information we do have suggests that, just like tinnitus, the sound doesn't actually make the same noise as Lucas was describing. Those who experience the sound have described it sounding more like a diesel car engine that someone has left running, not an incessant scratching. Lucas didn't receive a diagnosis for tinnitus and had to live with the scratching noise for the next 4 months. Looking at his social media accounts, you can see the parade of solutions Lucas tried.
Polly cycled the presentation through a series of Instagram posts. In each, Lucas was smiling and holding some new gadget. Each was captioned something like, "Thanks to the great guys at bettersleep.org for sending me this. Here's hoping." With each new post, Lucas's face sagged. His smile was more stretched and joyless. The dark rings under his eyes grew deeper. Even his brilliant white teeth seemed to stop sparkling like they used to.
The noise was taking a significant toll on Lucas. You can see his health deteriorating just in those posts, and it was starting to affect his career. Take a look at this live video he recorded in his 3rd month of living with the noise.
The video began with a loud rattling and blurred flashing images as Lucas fumbled with his phone before pointing the camera at himself. The image was very dark and grainy. Lucas's face was only lit by the glowing screen of the phone he was recording on. From what little the camera showed, he was in some state of undress, his chest bare.
Tomorrow,
Lucas began, his teeth gritted.
I'm supposed to post a sponsored video about Calm, this sleep app on your phone. But this thing...
Lucas shook the phone, blurring the image.
This fucking thing is useless. All I want is to sleep. Please, someone, just let me sleep.
Lucas made a sudden movement, and the image on the video turned completely black. All that was left was the audio. A frantic rattling, and suddenly a loud crack. The conference audience jumped at the sound. The video showed a brief glimpse of light before it returned to black, and another crack burst through the auditorium speakers. Somewhere behind the noise, 2 voices could be heard. One was Lucas, grunting and moaning. The other was a woman's. She was shouting,
"Stop! Stop it!"
Suddenly the picture was lit up again, as if someone turned on the lights. The audience had a brief glimpse of a bedside dresser, before the camera hurtled towards it, and the video ended with a final great crack.
Lucas destroyed his phone,
Polly said plainly.
Josie was scared. It wasn't the first time he'd acted like this, and they separated. Requests for sponsored posts stopped coming. Like all good stories, Lucas had to go through his darkest moments before he could come to the light. But not to worry. Just a week later, Lucas was to find his hero.
Polly smirked and clicked the remote again.
In me.
The next slide showed Polly and Lucas stood together. Polly was beaming, dressed in blue scrubs with her long hair tied into a high bun. Lucas looked just as exhausted, if not worse, than in the videos Polly had just played. His eyes were sunk deep into his face and stained bright pink, like he'd been awake all night crying. They were standing in a dental surgery. Behind them was an olive-green dental chair.
Something I failed to mention is that I've known Lucas personally for a number of years. He's been a patient at Edgewater Dental since before I bought the practice in 2009. A week after the incident you just watched, Lucas came in for his annual checkup. We caught up during his appointment, and Lucas was more than eager to tell me about his experiences with the noise. Lucas told me he'd even had to get a friend to drive him to the practice. The sound was so debilitating. I was taken aback, and I didn't think I could do anything to help him. Until I took his x-rays.
Polly had never heard a crowd gasp the way her audience did when she showed the next slide. The projected image displayed 2 x-rays, each aside of Lucas's mouth. At the centre of each tooth was a deep, black void.
One hell of a picture to show to a room filled with dentists, huh?
Polly smiled wryly.
What you're seeing is not an error, although we did think it might have been at first, but this is just a regular bite-wing radiograph. And yes, that is what you think it is. Every tooth is hollow. Perhaps what was most extraordinary to me was that Lucas's teeth weren't causing him pain. He was shocked to say the least when I explained to him he had a head full of empty teeth. He had experienced no discomfort in his teeth or gums, and my visual inspection hadn't shown any sign of caries or missing enamel. One thing that I can always say about Lucas is that he takes his oral health very seriously. You're probably eager to know what I did when I saw these x-rays. Well, I can tell you I was taken aback and immediately excused myself to consult with my associates. They were pretty shocked as well, but we talked through our options and agreed that some urgent, and you could say drastic, measures needed to be taken. If Lucas had felt no pain, it suggested that something had managed to rot away all the dentine in his mouth, including the root pulp in every tooth. Whatever was doing this could have serious consequences for the rest of his body. I talked with Lucas, advised him to make an emergency appointment with his GP, and asked if he would consent to an emergency extraction of one of his teeth. None of them were healthy enough to stay in his mouth much longer, so removing one immediately for investigation did not pose much risk. Lucas consented, and we proceeded with the extraction. Here,
Polly switched the projection,
is a picture of the tooth I extracted. By all appearances, it's a perfectly healthy premolar, other than this small hole in the enamel here, just above the root and below the line of the gum.
Polly took a laser pointer from the podium on stage and directed the audience to the tiny cavity.
So, in order to see what's going on, I decided to cut it open. One of my associates, Raj Breet Tangari, filmed the cutting for me. I will warn you, what we find inside is a bit stomach churning.
The video played. It showed Polly's hands in blue latex gloves, holding a small silver grinding tool. Lucas's extracted tooth was clamped into a vise on a pastel blue worktop.
Okay, we are recording.
Said a man's voice with a thick Indian accent. Polly's voice then came from the video.
Okay, this is the hollow tooth, extracted from a patient early this afternoon. We're just now about to try and cut it open to see what's happened here.
The grinding tool started whirring, and any other sound was drowned out. Polly's hands pressed the tool bit into the clamped tooth, and the sound increased in pitch. Polly didn't take long before she drew the tool away from the tooth and ended the whirring.
With just the enamel layer,
the Polly in the video explained,
it really hasn't taken long to make this weak enough. I think we could just pry the rest apart.
Polly loosened the clamp and plucked out the tooth with a pair of tweezers, laying it on a paper towel on top of the work counter. Then, with a pair of forceps and a periodontal scaler, she started working at the line she had cut into the tooth. Polly started to say,
poking around here, it almost feels like there's...
But she stopped abruptly. She squealed and dropped her tools with a clatter, her hands disappearing from frame. Something black was oozing from the cracked tooth. At first, it looked like a viscous, bubbling liquid. But then it stretched itself out from a wide, black puddle to a thin, struggling line. Something that looked like a black leech was climbing out of the tooth. It bobbed cautiously, probing the world outside of the tooth. Several voices in the audience watching screamed. Somebody audibly retched. On the video, Polly's voice, distant as if coming from the other end of the room, could be heard stammering,
Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god.
The thick Indian accent behind the camera simply asked,
What is that?
The video ended. Instead of letting the projection linger on the last frame, like with other videos, Polly advanced the projection to a blank white screen.
I do apologise for how upsetting that video can be,
Polly said. She held her hands together like a schoolgirl to make sure the audience saw her sincerity.
Please, if you feel you need to get some air, you won't be interrupting.
The doors in and out of the auditorium were already swinging open as some of the attendees were leaving.
But,
Polly went on to say,
while distressing, that video is very significant. It is the first known recording of the Lucurian limeworm, a newly identified species first discovered by me. This video is where all of the mysteries in my talk are solved. That slimy little black worm creeping out of Lucas's tooth is the answer to his hollow teeth, the cause of the constant noise he heard, and why they call it the Lake of Insanity. The Lucurian limeworm requires soft, calcium-rich deposits to complete its life cycle. Normally, it finds all the calcium it needs in the gypsum that is abundant in the lake bed. It lives there happily, thrives, and then disperses its eggs throughout the water to repeat the cycle again. When a foreign body comes into the water, like a goat looking to drink, or an English Instagram influencer going for a swim, that cycle is interrupted. The worm's eggs, so small they're invisible to the naked eye, can find their way into every crevice of the body, under fingernails, between hairs, and even into the gums. A worm egg lucky enough to find itself tucked into the periodontium then hatches and is immediately drawn to the calcium-rich dentine beneath the tooth enamel. The hole the worm bored into the enamel was so minuscule, we didn't even notice it on our first examination of Lucas's teeth. We don't know how many eggs got into Lucas's mouth. It could have been 100 all at once, or it could have been 1 or 2 that stayed in his teeth, living and reproducing until there was at least one worm inside every tooth in his head. I'm sure you've put this together already, and yes, the mysterious noise Lucas could hear was the sound of his teeth being eaten from the inside out.
The room was silent. It was uncomfortable. Polly beamed at the crowd to put them at ease.
Now, I don't want everyone to start panicking that you're going to have to learn a new decontamination procedure to deal with worms coming out of your patient's molars.
The crowd laughed, and the tension melted away. Polly nearly laughed out loud. It almost didn't matter what she said for the last 2 minutes of her talk. She already knew she'd given the most memorable speech of the conference. Probably the most memorable for the next 3 years' worth of conferences. That night, drinking endless glasses of wine in the conference centre bar, Polly laughed. She laughed every time someone offered to buy her next drink. She laughed at every single comment on her talk, whether it was funny or not. There was nothing she could do but laugh. Most dentists couldn't dream of making a mark on the industry in their whole careers like she just had in half an hour. Polly even laughed when her associate Rajpreet approached her from behind and laid a hand on her shoulder. She turned to face him, beaming like she had ever since she left the stage. But when Polly saw Rajpreet's face, his furrowed brow and wide, panicked eyes, her giddy fire started to dwindle. "Raj?" she asked. "What's happening?" Rajpreet fixed his eyes on hers. "You're going to need your phone," he told her. Polly didn't ask any other questions. She just moved away to find the table where she'd left her bag. As she went to the bag, Polly started to become aware of the conversations around her. The bar was steadily filling with shocked whispers. While she undid the clasps on her bag, those whispers began to give way to gasps. By the time Polly's phone was in her hand, Rajpreet was standing at her side. Polly swiped to unlock her phone, and Rajpreet pointed at her home screen. "Open Instagram," he told her. Polly opened the app and scanned her feed to try and see what was happening. In the top of the screen, a notification told Polly that Lucas was live. She glanced at Rajpreet. He nodded and gestured to her to open the live feed. When the live feed started, a horrid, wet, cracking sound burst out of her phone's speaker. The screen was a blur at first. Polly realised there was an arm in the way, obscuring what was happening. The chat was a constant stream of comments, coming and going in a flash. Polly could only make out a few words of each one before it was replaced by another. In the seconds she watched, multiple comments flashed by saying, "I've called the police. An ambulance is coming. Stop. You have to stop." Eventually, the arm in front of the camera moved, and Polly saw Lucas. He was holding a long, flat-head screwdriver with both hands. The steel head was buried between his top gums and his new porcelain bridgework. Polly stifled a sob with her hand. Blood was pouring from Lucas's mouth, flowing like a waterfall down his chin. Using the screwdriver like a crowbar, Lucas pried his new teeth out of his head. Polly could hear the sound of bones splintering as the titanium screws holding the teeth in were slowly pulled out of his upper jaw. One of his molars shattered from the stress. Polly dropped her phone. She looked up at Rajpreet. "Raj, what's happening?" she asked again. Rajpreet swallowed. "He said the noise didn't go away." Polly looked around the bar. Suddenly she realised how many people were staring at her. It was certain that no one would ever forget her now. We are all Fulcrum.
We are all Fulcrum.
Bravery and arrogance, fear and caution, the living and the dead, As we read our stories, the lines between the two are rarely as clear as we may believe. So remember, Fulcrum Knights, as you venture into the raging storm of the multiverse, what you see may not be as it appears, and all horrors and all havens will soon succumb to the undertow of eternity, and all pass into nothingness just the same. It is our duty to find the stories that would be lost, to search through unending timelines with the curiosity and fervor of an explorer. In our every act we remain inquisitive. In our every discovery we uphold the dignity and tolerance of our order. Go without fear, but not without caution. Go without arrogance, but maintain your bravery. Take what arms you may, for the multiverse holds more dangers than could ever be known. Bring back the stories. Fill our archives. And as you go, my knights, always remember, we are all Fulcrum.
That was the tales of the Fulcrum Knights, and if you want to join the order, then like and subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell icon so you do not miss when a new video goes out or a live stream begins, because you must do your duty as a member of the Knights of Fulcrum. Your first duty as a knight is make sure you're listening to everything we have to offer here on this channel. We have audiobooks, we have original short stories, we have audio comics. The Last Ronin series in particular is a fantastic piece produced by my dear friend and producer of this channel, Gilbert. Your second duty is to get into the chat on our live streams. We're live every Saturday. We want to know what you think about pop culture. We want to know about Star Wars. We want to know about Marvel, about DC, about video games, about horror movies. Turn up and talk to us. And your third duty is have a good, scary Halloween.